Welcome, everybody. Happy to be back here as usual with Ryan Heath from Converge One Government Solutions. Hi, Ryan.
Hey, how's it going? Welcome, guys.
And today we're also joined by a return guest from Ciena, Jim Westdorp. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you.
And also from Converge One Government Solutions, we're joined by Lenny Kay. Lenny, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Lenny, I think you have some questions that you want to ask or talk to Jim about. Do you want to sort of tee up what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about quantum key distribution cryptography, basically the latest form of encrypting data through an optical transport system, if you will. And me not being the expert, I have several questions for Jim to hopefully elaborate on.
Excellent. Sounds good.
So, Jim, overall, can you explain what quantum key distribution is, really, and how it works, and where the applications are in the industry right now?
Quantum key distribution and quantum techniques have been around and talked about for quite some time. They're coming up and coming to the fore of discussions and resulting in investment and new capabilities, mainly because we're starting to get closer to the point when realistic quantum computers are going to be available. It's still sometime in the future when we've got quantum computers with enough qubits to potentially break some of the classical encryption algorithms that are in use today. And so as this starts to become more of a reality, it's not there yet. People are starting to think about, well, if a quantum computer exists that could break some of my classic cryptography, which actually the foundations of security on the internet is based on, what are some of the things we have to worry about, and what are some of the technologies that we can use to mitigate the risks against that? And quantum key distribution is one of those technologies that takes what is one of the areas of public key infrastructure and public cryptography, one of the areas where there's a weakness that could potentially be exploited by a quantum computer, and strengthens that in a way that it can't be attacked. So we're looking at different parts of the overall, I'll call, cryptography ecosystem, and looking at the parts that are potentially able to be attacked by new technologies, quantum technologies, and strengthening them. Quantum key distribution in particular is a way of distributing key that the encryptors are going to use on both ends of a network in such a way that it can be distributed without fear of somebody intercepting it from a man-in-the-middle attack. And most importantly, if there was some kind of a man-in-the-middle attack or somebody was snooping on your communications, you can detect that. So QKD is a way of distributing key in such a way that you can prove that you can detect if there's somebody was listening to you, and it's distributed in such a way that they can't get useful information out, even if they were to intercept it.
Hey, Jim, when this becomes a reality, what do you see kind of the prep that a key customer would have to do to put this in place?
What we're doing is we're trying to lay the foundations and enable this technology, QKD in the case of this discussion, to be brought into an existing cryptographic system. So we at Ciena anyway, and others are doing this as well, are implementing it in such a way that you have to add some new equipment, but it doesn't actually break or fundamentally change the kinds of cryptography that you use. It changes the key distribution process, but the fundamental encryption capabilities and encryption engines actually are still fundamentally safe, and it uses those. So we've added an additional way to accept key to existing cryptographic elements, and that's how we bring it in, so that it can be an upgrade as opposed to a rip and replace.
And so is this a third-party box that would have to be brought in?
So we've taken our high-speed wireline encryptors that are built as part of Ciena's network infrastructure, right? So we can encrypt at high speed, multiple tens, hundreds of gigabits per second, right? Actually, the most recent one is 800 gigabits per second. We can encrypt. The next generation coming on, and then by the end of this year, there's going to be 1.6 terabits worth of traffic that we can encrypt in real time without incremental latency. What we've done is we've built into our current generation and our next generation cryptos the ability to take key from an external source. Normally, the keys are generated internally, securely, in such a way that nobody can ever see them, other than the two cryptos which are communicating. And that's great for classical encryption using public key infrastructure to exchange keys between them so that they can safely talk. But it does still leave the key exchange protocol potentially exposed to a attack by a quantum computer from somebody who's listening in on the conversation. So we've added an extra port to our cryptographic computers so that now we can accept outside key, and we can accept that outside key from anybody, but it's designed to be to accept key from a quantum key distribution device. And so, yeah, we've added a standards compliant interface to our crypto engines and our cryptographic modems that allows us to securely exchange key information with a third party. And then, yeah, we've done interoperability testing with specific QKD devices. Our bit is to put the appropriate ingress point into our equipment and to use standard APIs to exchange key information between a key distribution device like a QKD machine and our cryptos.
The Ciena is already kind of future-proofed the line going forward. You guys are kind of ready to go in the market.
Yeah, we have.
It's ready.
Excuse me. There's a number of things that we've done to our cryptographic engines already to make them resistant to quantum attack. But if in addition to that, you want to harden the key exchange process from quantum attack as well, we now have a way to do that. And yeah, there's an in-service upgrade path for that.
Yep.
Jim, I believe they call it in-flight encryption. The data is encrypted right on the box, such as a Ciena Wave server I.
Yep.
Can you speak a little bit about the importance of that, being that the data is leaving the box as safely as possible, if you will?
To have a truly safe overall transmission system for data from endpoint to endpoint, particularly these days where there are multiple points that your network could be attacked, requires securing the data and requires encryption at more than just one point. I mean, almost anybody who cares about their data is certainly encrypting it at the endpoints. As the data you care about is flowing through the network, in many cases, and actually in almost all cases, there's incremental bits of information that are attached to it that say things about who it is that's sending the message and where it's going and the kinds of protocols that are being used, so that even though you encrypted the message when you sent it out, as it flows through the network, there's what's called metadata, things about the information, about the conversation that are exchanged in the clear. Even if an adversary gets that, they still get a lot of information about the conversation and who's talking to whom, which can be very valuable. So you want to encrypt and protect your information at multiple layers. Yes, at the endpoints, but also at the different demarc points. And in the case of Ciena, which we build the equipment that runs the wide area network, the fiber optic infrastructure between locations, we specifically want to protect the information when it's in flight. When you're transporting the data, which is where we come in, you want to make sure that you encrypt the data as it's in flight. So in each phase that your data takes across the network, you would want to encrypt it. And the piece that we specifically look at is data in flight, and we do that integral to the modems, because unless you do the encryption as part of the modem itself, it gets expensive, latency prone. It costs heat, power, things like that. So yeah, we actually do data in flight, and it's designed to protect the information as it's going across your fiber optic infrastructure, so that if somebody has access to your fiber and they're looking at it, you've encrypted everything, not just a couple of, not just the conversation of interest, not just certain protocols, but you've encrypted everything. Because we've encrypted bulk, everything that's flowing over that fiber optic line, it forces the adversary to, even if they want to, figure out the data there, now they have to take all of the data at once to try to decrypt it, because we've encrypted it all as a unit. So the bad guys, if they want to come after you, and even if they had a quantum computer, they still have to grab 800 gigabits per second or 1.6 terabits worth of data a second for now and forever.
We did a little bit of back and forth of information leading up to this, and one of the things that's mentioned in the background information is the idea that if someone were to sniff the qubits, they basically they're rendered useless. What does that look like in terms of the transaction from the sender to the receiver?
Right.
And what happens in terms of, do they need to send the files again, for example, if it's a file exchange? What does that look like, or how does that actually play out?
Right. Yeah. So in this case, what we're talking about is a quantum channel that's used to exchange information about the key itself. It's not the encrypted data. It's just the keys. What happens when an attacker comes in and says, okay, now there's this QKD channel and I'm going to sniff it? There's a particular data rate. And there's error correction and detection on that channel. It's a quantum process, so there's no way for anybody to look at the signal without taking some photons away,
right,
to detect the signal. And as soon as they do that, the other side detects it and knows. If it detects that enough light has been lost through some other means, the assumption is somebody's tapped it. It'll declare those keys invalid and will never use them. So it basically it provides intrusion detection, so if somebody's looking, and even if somebody and if you determine that somebody's looking, you never use the keys that they've looked at.
Right.
And that way, you've never allowed encrypted data to go over your network with keys that have been compromised.
Okay. So you're really kind of protecting the transatlantic lines, the core lines outside of the U.S. as well?
Excellent question, and you've touched on something that is one of the constraints of QKD. So a QKD, a quantum key distribution system, doesn't really work over an amplified system. So it's good for single spans. So right now it's good for locations that are up to 100, maybe 120 kilometers apart. If it's more than that, then you've got to regenerate the signal, which is no problem. You can do that. But now you have to put extra equipment every 120 kilometers to replicate that key distribution. But by definition, you can't send it under the ocean because QKD replicators under the ocean don't exist. There are ways to solve the problem. There are people talking about, since it can go a single hop, basically. In fiber optic terrestrial and submarine systems, those hops, 120 kilometers terrestrially, undersea, they're only 50 or 60. So if you wanted to do key distribution transatlantic, you've got to find another way of getting the photons that contain your quantum key distribution words across there. Those kind of distances, you'd need a satellite. Nobody's doing that right now, but that's one of the solutions to the problem of QKD not going through optical amplifiers.
With that said, taking distance reach into consideration, how does that work with the latest iterations of 400 gig ZR optics that have these longer reaches without needing the amplification? Is that a real world scenario where these latest and greatest 400 gig optics are viable for QKD?
Quantum key distribution, as it is today, is going to be used in the metro and regional areas. Is really where I see this. So banks are going to use it. They'll use it around Washington D.C. They could use it between data centers.
Sure.
And then when you go over the really wide area, you'll use other techniques. You'll use classical techniques. You could use multiple encryption. Multiple wrappings of encryption.
So I'm looking at this as a solution set for like the Secret Service within the DC metro area, maybe our test ranges, things of that nature.
The use cases, from a commercial side and a military side, they've used them for secure transactions between banks, hospital systems, DoD entities. Again, have used it between data centers and amongst places within a constrained geographic area. It really all depends on what your threat vectors are. What you're trying to protect yourself against, and the sensitivity of the data. In many cases, the data isn't critical enough that it needs to go through the extra phase of doing QKD or some of the more esoteric encryption. But for the highest security levels of information, and if other people know that you're exchanging that sort of information, so that they might know to attack the data, or if they happen to know where it's flowing through, you would make the assessment that, well, okay, the risk of this data over that particular path is high enough that yes, I'm going to put the best possible encryption capabilities there, as well as a means to detect if somebody's trying to tap into my fiber.
So do you see that also in like maybe top secret research facilities as a benefit?
Yep. Yeah, like I said, commercially it's been banks, hospitals, financial institutions, and on the DoD side, it's going to start in the research side, right? But then it'll migrate to the what I'll call highly critical infrastructure.
Yep.
So forgive me if I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but you've mentioned banks a couple of times. Do you want to say anything about the partnership? Is that relevant here?
It is. So as I mentioned, QKD technology has been around for a while. It's starting to gain prominence because of the threat from from quantum computers. Becoming more real. And Ciena in particular, we've done a proof of concept. We demonstrated the ability to not only utilize QKD in our encryption processes, but we also demonstrated the co-propagation of the QKD signals, as well as the wavelength division multiplex and the high-speed data signals from our modems. So in a classic QKD implementation, you would actually have a dedicated fiber just for the QKD data, just for the key data, and then you'd have another fiber where you had your high-speed, commercial traffic. Because fiber optic cables are a critical resource that you typically don't have excess of. In some cases you do, but in many cases you do not. So you'd like to be able to run your QKD distribution, your key distribution, over the same fiber that you're sending your high-speed data traffic. And that's specifically what we showed, is that you can run the two together, on a single hop, not through multiple amplifiers, but on a single hop, separated upwards of 100 kilometers or so. You can get it all on a single fiber, and now you can have fiber intrusion detection, fiber security, and you can have interoperability with a QKD device for the most secure encryption that's available today.
So ideally, the scenario where you're using the same fiber to transport the data, and as well as encrypting, or the QKD part of it, is the best scenario. It's the best of both worlds over a very constrained resource, if you will.
Correct. Yeah. For places where fiber is constrained, which there are a lot
which
of
is
places.
most places, as we know.
A lot of places, because even if you have fiber, it's
don't want to
valuable,
use it,
right? You're not.
Yes.
You don't want to. You want to just throw. You want to use a fiber for a relatively low bandwidth item like key distribution. If you don't have to. I mean, if you had to, you had to. But in this case, no. We've been able to co-propagate, which is a definite benefit.
Is there any governing bodies, if you will, or any constraints within the business world, the government world, that have a say in how this is going to play out, or rules, regulations to that effect, that may hinder or help further strengthen, bolster, and deploy QKD?
Right. So I would say the standards process for QKD is much the same as for quantum resistant algorithms, which is to say that there are standards works in process and the various standards are emergent. There are standards in process and have been for some time in the ITU. There are also ETSI standards, in particular, what we use for the key exchange between the Ciena network encryption device and, in this case that we talked about in the press release, the Toshiba QKD device. There's a API standard, an applications programming interface standard for exchanging keys securely between a crypto and a QKD device. It's there's an ETSI QKD standard for that, and so we use that. And so yes, standards are there. I would say like I said, they're emergent and in the process of changing and being standardized. But it's not like it's the Wild West where anything goes. There are a number of standards to follow, and that's another reason why now you're starting to see it more, because we're getting this convergence of the threat from quantum computing, the need to do something about that, and requisite standards to enable those, the enhancements to cryptography to be done in a way that lots of people can use without it being a full one of custom solution, which sure, national governments can afford these things, but if you want to make anything in quantity, there's got to be standards for that, and there are. And we talked about this earlier. Anytime you have highly valuable data flowing across networks that potentially you don't physically fully control, you want to make sure that you've encrypted the data so that it's protected as it's flowing across that network that perhaps you don't have eyes on every single centimeter of. And you protect it in such a way that if anybody was to do something or try something nefarious, you could detect it. And QKD does exactly that.
Well, not to mix metaphors, but that kind of goes back to the old standard that the chain is only as strong as the weakest link, right? So we want every link to be as strong as possible.
So for Ciena, we're trying to make the link that we control, which is can control, which is the wide area network and the transmission of data in flight, making sure that not only can be encrypted, but can be encrypted in a way that's quantum safe. And for those networks that require the highest amounts of security, not only is it quantum safe, but it's quantum secure in that if anybody were to do an intrusion, you could detect that.
So I think we covered everything then. Ryan, do you have anything that you want to add?
No, I mean, I learned a lot. Having Ciena kind of be on the forefront of that, especially with the ability to kind of focus in on the sectors of, the government, very high secure aspects of that, the finance sector, hospitals, and research facilities, I think is great.
When quantum computers become more mainstream,
when you can buy one at Best Buy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When they're a little more ubiquitous, then we're going to have some of these basically counter technologies available to make sure that the data we exchange over our networks is still secure, even in the face of a different kind of computational threat. We know how to do that. That's what Toshiba and ID Quantique and in collaboration with us, what we've done is we've shown there are ways, even when there's a new when there's a new technology that could potentially attack classic crypto, there's counter technologies like this that we can apply so that the comms remain safe. It may cost some money. It may mean that we have to do things a little differently. It doesn't mean we have to do things fundamentally different, but in some of the process and some of the equipment that we use, yes, has to evolve, and we're working on that now. I would say total guess on my part, but we're still over a decade away from when quantum computers are going to be a threat to current cryptographic systems, and so we've got some time to make sure that A, we have practical solutions, and B, we've developed them to the point that they can be deployed in scale before the threat from quantum computers becomes real.
Do we want to mention the competitive landscape with the in-flight encryption with regards to the rest of the competitive, the ADVAs or Infineros of the world. You guys are clearly light years ahead, no pun intended, of encrypting things AES 256. But also, there's probably an advantage to you partnering with Toshiba and the
Yep.
other company, so that our um, people are aware of where Ciena stands alongside the rest of the pack. I don't know if you want to.
From a competitive perspective,
Mhm.
um, we are certainly from a speed perspective, from building in standardized interfaces to QKD and others, we're either the first or nearly the first. So we're certainly well in the lead amongst the current vendors in terms of the capabilities that we have. But we're also pretty cognizant that we have to do things in a standards compliant way, because especially for things like this. Because yes, absolutely, it's in our DNA to be in the lead technologically, but you know, unless this stuff becomes standardized over time and ubiquitously deployed by all the vendors, um, it's not going to be safe for everybody like it needs to be. So uh, I think we're in the lead. We will continue to be so, but that's only so our customers can have a look see for what's coming and be prepared.
Great. Well, I think that covers everything for today then.
Okay, cool.
Jim, I don't know if you're aware of this, but our previous conversations with you are some of the highest rated videos that we have in the channel.
Oh,
So
good.
I'm
Well,
looking forward to
happy to
seeing
hear that.
Yeah, I'm looking
You know,
forward
I,
to seeing.
We're in
in,
the presence of greatness, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
in general, I try not to watch myself just because it hurts me. And but maybe I'll go out and look,
Yep.
or have my
Yeah.
son look for me.
Oh, well, yeah, it can be encouraging, right?
Yeah,
But I want to thank you for joining us again today. It's good to have you here.
sure.
It's good to see you. And Lenny, it's good to have you come on
Yeah, nice
and
to
be
meet
with us
you.
today.
Yeah,
And Ryan, as
absolutely.
always happy to be here with you. And
Appreciate it.
everyone, like, share, and subscribe. Definitely pass this around your IT colleagues and government and civil agency colleagues. And we'll be back soon with another episode. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.